Great.
Can I check something with you on the good side? Okay. In my mind, what you're talking, the image that I have is, let's say you have a flat landscape, right? The country, and suddenly areas of it collapse. At the same time, there are little, let's call them silos or whatever, that stay up. Could you talk about that? In other words,
exactly.
What is most likely to go right down and what is most likely to be left standing?
Okay, let's call a spade here. Yes, I think that is exactly what I'm calling. Before I answer that, let me just put another spin to this whole thing. If you analyze economic activities over time, and that's the most amazing thing, if we see how economies evolve over time. I mean, I love this subject, economics, because it is about people and how people change and how people do things differently. And what is obviously happening, and this is no surprise, this is no major insight, but what is happening is that the economy is becoming more sophisticated, more service-orientated, and more, let's call it, digitizable.
Yes.
And you can see that in economic activities. I mean, 100 years ago, probably 70% probably 80% of the people in South Africa work either on farms or in the mines. And today, that is, I wonder if it's 10%. I doubt whether it's 10%. Most people today work in factories, or more importantly, in the service industry, what we're doing now, or in finance, or become lawyers, or whatever the case may be. And that's where economic activities are. That's where growth is taking place. But in order to participate in that part of the economy, you need to have special skills, and you have to have a reliable internet, what I don't necessarily have, and you have to have the hardware. You have to have computers and things. But skills is the most important part. So what is happening is that economies are becoming more cloud-based. And that's where economic activities are happening. I mean, I'm sitting at home here, and I don't even go to my office that often anymore. I talk to clients on the internet, and I don't need to go anywhere. As long as I've got a good internet connection, I can still do what I'm supposed to. And I can be anywhere in the world. That's an important thing to understand. Yeah. So coming back to the good and the bad in South Africa, because of many reasons, but because of, very importantly, a horrible skills development system in South Africa, education system. I call it skills development because skills is far more important than qualifications. But because of the horrible skills development system in South Africa, the majority, and they are mostly black people, and they are mostly rural people, and majority are probably women or girls, their skills are simply not good enough to participate in a modern economy. They just don't. Even if you get a matric, we produce 600,000 matriculants every year, but we produce a product that nobody wants. Nobody wants to employ them. So we've got a major skills problem. They're mostly poor black people, and they are not going to be part of the modern economy. Not only because of skills, but also because the economy is just not growing. And the best way to get a good job in any economy is to get a job to start off with. Not a good job, a job. They're not going to get jobs. Be high levels of unemployment, high levels of poverty, low levels of skill. So that's a majority of South Africans. They're mostly black. Of course, there are some others. It differs from various regions in South Africa. So yes, I'm afraid that if you go to, I guess you guys have been to Africa, go to Mozambique is a very good example. Yeah. Go to rural Zambia, see what people live like there, and go to even the rural places in South Africa. That is where the majority of South Africans are going to end up in the short term, at least. For the rest, a tiny minority in South Africa, they will take part in this modern economy. They have the skills, they've got proper internet connections, they live in security complexes like this, they've got their own solar panels, they've got their own security people, they've got all that sort of stuff, and it doesn't matter where they stay, whether they're in South Africa or they stay. I got stuck in Moscow last year. And I kept on doing my stuff because I've got a computer and an internet connection, and some people didn't even know that I was in Moscow, as an example. So, yes. So the answer to your question, yes. For all these various forces, what is probably going to happen in South Africa, we're going to. I don't like the word third world country, but we're going to stay a poor country, and large chunks of the populations will get stuck and stay part of the, let's call it the third world. I don't like that word. While a few islands of prosperity in a sea of poverty.
What's exciting about what you're suggesting, or what we all actually know, is that if you just have an internet connection and a computer, you can escape all the devastation if you just know how to use it.
Exactly. And that's why people ask me quite often, but this is a bad place and blah, blah, blah. They're going to send their kids out of there. They're going to emigrate and all that. That's the wrong approach, because South Africa differs from other countries in one very important aspect. Well, in many, but in one, something that's very important, that South Africa is a dangerous place. It's a danger. We are still physical beings. So you have to stay somewhere, and you have to make sure that you and your family are safe. That must be your first priority. But once you're safe, I mean, South Africa is the most amazing place. Look at this weather. We've got nice brandy and wine. We've got biltong, and we've got braai and steaks and that sort of stuff. It is the most amazing place to be. But you must be safe. And once you're safe, I mean, the cost of living is very low in South Africa. You've got really the most amazing place. But safety is perhaps the biggest challenge in the country.
So just let's not forget what you said just now. You said some islands. Would you care to give some criteria of such, other than internet, obviously? Like, for example, what would be the characteristics of the parts of South Africa that would remain, let's say, where they are, and the ones that are going? You've already explained the ones that are going to go lower, and I fully understand. Even if you drive around South Africa, you don't have to go anywhere else. We were talking to a person yesterday. They were traveling through the Free State, and they were saying to us, a lot of the small towns are wiped out. There's nothing left. I mean, this is not a joke. This is not a joke, right?
Yeah.
And everybody loses in my book, but nevertheless. So what would be the criteria? Internet is one of them. Anything else? Safety, I understand that, yes.
Yes. I think an economist quite often refer to this thing that is called the middle class. Uh-huh. And when you talk about the middle class, people immediately think people with a certain level of income. But that is not what the middle class is. And I can give you a good example. My son is a lawyer here in Pretoria, and about 2 years ago, he decided to start his own practice without money. And he lived out of my pocket mostly for the first year while he had his own practice, because he simply couldn't make it financially. And for the past year or so, he hasn't been asking for any money. But so financially, he was certainly not part of the middle class. But he has always been part of the middle class because of two things. The one is, and I would like to think that my children's got a certain set of values, and that is crucially important. The middle class has a certain set of values. There are many examples where countries were completely destroyed during wars or whatever the case might be, but because of a set of values, those companies rebuild themselves economically in a very short period of time. Why is that? They had nothing, but they succeeded economically in a very short period of time. And our answer to that is that they have a certain set of values. And we can go into those values if you want to. I think the values are normal, straightforward things. Don't steal, sort of. If you enter into a contract, respect your contracts and that sort of stuff. So that's important, a set of values. A second thing that's important is a safety net of some sorts. You need to have a safety net of some sorts. And my son is again a very good example. During his time of trying to establish his own business, I supported him, and he actually stayed with us as well. My wife eventually kicked him out, but he stayed with us for some time because he had a social safety net. He had a safety net. So those are the two important things that I think. Now, if you understand those two important things, then I think a lot of things become much clearer. Is that people with a certain values, and people with certain social safety nets, and people with certain skills will probably start getting together and form them and organize themselves in little communities. And we find it all these security estates that we find nowadays. That nobody lived in a security estate 20 years ago. Now everybody lives in a security estate. That's an excellent example of that. But it's not only security estates. There's a little bit more to that. There are so many social organizations. I mean, you know the list. There's a long list of them. I think, like, for example, amongst Afrikaners, there are quite a number of them. Like, for example, Solidariteit is a good one. Sakeliga is another good one. There are these organizations organizing themselves in one way or the other because they've got a certain set of values that they all agree in, and by organizing themselves together, they're actually creating this network that can also be supportive of the members of that. But it can also be larger geographic areas. I think the Western Cape is a good example. The Western Cape is an area that is obviously much better managed than the rest of the country in South Africa. And the reason for that has to do with politics that's different. We've got a political party there with a different ideology, much more efficient political party that's in charge of the Western Cape and so on. So it's not only a matter of a sea of devastation and a few islands of prosperity. There are sort of grey areas in between as well. Okay. At least that's why I see it.
Dawie, on that point of the Western Cape, Alan Winde, I believe, is trying to get control of the railways. But some argue that would be a disaster because many of these railway companies are bankrupt. Do you really want control of them? If you're a provincial government, is that really something you want, to get control of Transnet?
Donald, I understand, and I don't have first-hand experience of this, but I understand is a town, I think it's Montague, or is it Ceres? One of the Cape Town, one of the towns in the Cape. It's a fruit-producing area. And they have a private a train or railroad that goes to the harbour, managed by a private sector. So I understand Alan Winde trying to get more control over over that part of infrastructure. But if I was him, I would concession that out as soon as I possibly can. But by the way, that's exactly what the ANC is doing. If you listen to what the Minister of Finance said, he's going to bail out Eskom, but before he bails out Eskom needs to concession out the power stations. The minister, they also mentioned they want to get private sector participation to fix their railroads between Johannesburg and Durban, as an example. That's one of those examples where you do everything wrong, and eventually the only thing that you can do is the right thing. So yes, so it's happening. It's in fact happening in the rest of the country as well. But if I was Alan Winde, I would just certainly try to get control over those things, but to give it away to the private sector as soon as possible.
Can I draw just on this note, the Durban line and so on? What you're talking now, in my mind, reminds me of what happened in Greece. I don't know if you're familiar with what happened there. Eventually, they sold the country off piece by piece. The port went to the Chinese, the railways, I think, to a German company, telecoms, electricity department. So what is happening now? They have to pay the prices that the private companies require or demand, or whichever way you want to phrase it. So in a sense, they're stuck because they've sold it off. Now what?
No. I don't know the Greek situation that well. So, but I do know some other similar sort of experiments, and South Africa is a good one as well. I had a debate with a journalist the other day, and she said, but electricity is so important, we cannot allow the private sector to be the sole provider of electricity because the private sector wants to make money out of it and electricity prices will go up. And the answer to that is yes, perhaps electricity prices will go up, but people don't realize, people in South Africa do not know what the electricity prices in South Africa are. We know how much you pay if you buy electricity from Eskom, but that's not the real price. Because the real price is actually a lot of subsidies that's given to Eskom by the taxpayer. That is, we're paying for electricity double in a way. And that, I suspect, in many cases in the world, that you may think that you're paying more for a train trip now, you're paying more for electricity or whatever the case might be, more than what you paid previously. But in fact, you're actually paying less because those subsidies are not there anymore. And more importantly, of course, is, and I want to tell another story as well, but more importantly, you can actually get electricity in Greece today, I suspect, and you can actually get all those sort of services while you couldn't get it previously. It makes me think of something that is also, and that is in the old Soviet Union. I studied communism. I think communism is a fascinating ideology, and I studied communism. And I can remember that, and I'm married to a Russian girl as well, and I've been to Russia many times. And in the old Soviet Union, and I can talk about this the whole day, in the old Soviet Union, they had something called scientific communism, where they calculated how many calories a household needs to survive, and they based that on what your salaries will be, and blah, blah, blah. And that required prices to be fixed in the Soviet Union. So all prices were fixed. Bread and milk and cheese and eggs, everything was fixed at exactly the same price right across the Soviet Union. And if you deviated from that price, you could get fined, you could go to jail. So prices were fixed, completely set at a certain level. So everything was very cheap. It was set at a very cheap level. You just couldn't get it, but it was cheap. And that's the difference. So prices were not allowed to go up and down. So it was cheap, you just couldn't get it in an old Soviet Union. And that, in a way, is quite often what happens if the state manages something, and especially if the state's got a monopoly over something. It may appear to be cheap. It's not cheap, firstly. And secondly, it could be cheap, but you're not going to get it.
Okay.
Zimbabwe.
Thanks.
Yeah.